The arena was packed to capacity that night. Thousands of people had gathered from different cities, different backgrounds, but with one shared purpose: faith. The stage lights glowed softly as gospel music faded into silence. Then, Benny Hinn stepped forward, dressed in his signature white suit. Holding the microphone with calm authority, the crowd erupted in applause. For decades, Benny Hinn had been known for moments like this: healing services, powerful sermons, emotional breakthroughs. People leaned forward in their seats, expecting another unforgettable night, but no one knew what was about to happen. As Benny began speaking about surrender, humility, and listening to God's voice, the camera slowly panned across the audience. Elderly couples clasped hands. Young people closed their eyes in prayer. Ushers stood quietly along the walls. And then, in the front section, sat someone completely unexpected: Steven Seagal. No spotlight, no announcement, no security fuss. Just Steven Seagal, sitting still, his hands folded, his expression serious, almost heavy. A few people recognized him and whispered to each other, confused about why a Hollywood action star would be at a Christian revival. Steven didn't smile. He didn't wave. He barely moved. Back on stage, Benny Hinn continued preaching, unaware that many eyes had begun shifting toward the front row. As the sermon intensified, something strange happened. Steven slowly stood up. The murmurs grew louder. People nudged each other. Is that really him? Why is Steven Seagal here? Steven didn't look around. His eyes were fixed on the stage. Benny Hinn paused mid-sentence. He noticed the movement, the noise, the distraction. His gaze followed the whispers until it landed on Steven Seagal, standing quietly among the seated crowd. For a moment, time felt suspended. Steven raised his hand slightly, not dramatically, just enough to signal that he wanted to speak. The music stopped completely. Ushers exchanged nervous looks. The cameras zoomed in. Benny Hinn leaned closer to the microphone, visibly puzzled. Yes? He asked carefully. Steven took a deep breath. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm, but weighted with something deeper than confidence. I wasn't planning to come up here tonight, he said, but I need to say this, because I was told not to stay silent. The crowd went dead quiet. You could hear people breathing. Then Steven added the words that instantly shifted the atmosphere of the entire room. Last night, Jesus spoke to me. Gasps echoed through the arena. And in that moment, before anyone could fully process what was happening, one thing became clear to everyone. Watching, this night was not going to end the way anyone expected. A wave of murmurs rolled through the arena the moment Steven Seagal spoke those words. Jesus spoke to me. Some people leaned forward in disbelief. Others instinctively bowed their heads, unsure whether to pray or simply listen. Cameras zoomed in, catching every reaction: shock, curiosity, skepticism, awe. Benny Hinn stood still on stage. For a brief moment, the seasoned evangelist, a man who had faced massive crowds for decades, seemed unsure how to respond. His hand tightened slightly around the microphone. He had invited testimonies before, but this was different. This wasn't planned. This wasn't controlled. Steven Seagal remained standing, his posture calm, almost restrained. He wasn't trying to command the room. In fact, his voice carried no theatrical energy at all. It was steady, serious, personal. I know who I am to most of you, Steven continued. You've seen me in movies. You think you know my life, but I'm not here as an actor tonight. The crowd quieted further. I struggled all night with whether I should speak, he said. I told myself, this isn't my place. This isn't my moment. But when something is put on your heart this heavily, ignoring it feels like disobedience. Benny Hinn glanced toward his team at the side of the stage. No one interrupted. Ushers stood frozen, unsure whether to allow this unexpected turn or step in. The atmosphere had shifted from celebration to something heavier, more intimate. Steven took a step closer to the aisle, still not approaching the stage. Last night, he said slowly, I was praying, not for fame, not for protection. I was asking questions, hard ones. A few people in the crowd nodded instinctively. They knew that feeling. And that's when I felt a presence I can't explain away, Steven continued. Not a dream, not imagination, a clarity that shook me. The room was silent now. No coughing, no movement. Even the children seemed still. Benny Hinn swallowed and finally spoke. Take your time, he said softly. Steven nodded once, grateful but still intense. What I was told wasn't easy to hear, he said, and it wasn't meant to embarrass anyone. That sentence alone sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. People exchanged looks. Some shifted in their seats. A few began recording again, sensing that this moment was becoming something far bigger than a testimony. Steven paused, then added, "This message wasn't about judgment. It was about responsibility." Benny Hinn's expression changed, not fear, but focus. He listened closely, as if weighing every word. The tension in the room thickened. Whatever Steven was leading up to, everyone could feel it was personal, directed, purposeful. At this point, people around the world watching the live stream were flooding the chat. Comments flew by faster than anyone could read them. Is this real? Why is he saying this? This feels serious. Thanks for watching. Before we go further, comment below and tell us which country or city you're watching this from. Let's see how far this moment reached around the world. Steven took another breath, his eyes briefly closing as if grounding himself. I was told to speak clearly, he said. Not loudly, not angrily, just truthfully. Benny Hinn nodded again, slowly. The crowd sensed it now. This wasn't a confrontation yet, but it was moving toward something unavoidable. Steven lifted his head and looked directly at the stage. And what I was told to say next, he said, his voice lowering, changed how I see this moment, and this platform, forever. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. Everyone knew the next words would matter. And once spoken, nothing would be the same. Steven Seagal stood motionless for a few seconds, as if weighing the cost of what he was about to say. The silence in the arena felt heavy, not awkward, but intense, almost sacred. Thousands of eyes were fixed on him, waiting. Benny Hinn remained still on stage, his expression calm but alert. He had spent his life around moments of faith, emotion, and spiritual claims. Yet something about this felt different. This wasn't performance. This wasn't excitement. It felt restrained, deliberate. Steven finally spoke again. What I'm about to say, he began, is not something I wanted to repeat out loud. In fact, I tried to convince myself I misunderstood it. A soft murmur passed through the crowd. I told myself it was just my conscience, or my imagination, or exhaustion. Steven continued. But the message didn't fade. It stayed. It pressed harder. He paused and looked down briefly, then back up at the stage. When Jesus spoke to me, he said carefully, emphasizing each word. It wasn't with anger. It wasn't loud. It wasn't condemning. The crowd leaned in. It was calm, Steven said, and that calmness made it more unsettling than anything I've ever experienced. Benny Hinn shifted his stance slightly. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend himself. He simply listened. Steven continued. I was told that platforms are dangerous things, that when people listen to you, you carry weight, whether you want it or not. A few people nodded instinctively. Others clasped their hands tighter. He said that influence can heal, Steven went on, but it can also blind, especially when applause becomes louder than reflection. The words hung in the air. Steven took a slow breath. Then came the part that shook me. The room felt smaller somehow. Even the cameras seemed closer. He said, ask him who he is speaking for when the crowd cheers. A visible reaction rippled through the audience. Some gasped softly. Others looked toward the stage immediately. Benny Hinn's face changed, not dramatically, but noticeably. His eyes lowered for a brief moment, as if absorbing the weight of that sentence. Steven wasn't finished. He said, remind him that my name is not a performance. The arena fell into complete silence. No music. No whispers. No movement. Steven continued, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. I was told that miracles don't begin on stages. They begin in private obedience. And when that order is reversed, something breaks. A few people in the front rows wiped their eyes. Others sat frozen, unsure how to process what they were hearing. Steven looked around briefly, then returned his focus to Benny Hinn. This wasn't about accusing you, he said firmly. It was about reminding you, and maybe reminding all of us. Benny Hinn swallowed hard. He lifted the microphone slightly, then lowered it again, choosing not to speak yet. Steven added, I was told to say this exactly as I heard it, not softer, not harsher. He closed his eyes for a moment, then said the sentence that caused the first audible reaction from the stage. Tell him that if he listens more than he performs, he will not fall. A collective inhale swept through the room. Benny Hinn's grip on the microphone tightened. His shoulders rose slightly, as if he were steadying himself. The camera zoomed in, capturing a raw, unguarded expression. Not defensive, not angry, but shaken. Around the arena, people began whispering prayers under their breath. Steven stepped back half a pace, signaling that he was nearly done. "I don't know what you'll do with this," he said quietly. "That's not my responsibility. My responsibility was to speak." He looked at the crowd now, and to everyone listening, this wasn't meant to elevate me. It was meant to humble all of us. If you were sitting in that crowd at this exact moment, would you feel inspired, uncomfortable, or skeptical? Comment below which one inspired, uncomfortable, or skeptical. Steven turned his attention back to the stage one final time. "I didn't come here to challenge your faith," he said. "I came here because my own faith was challenged first." Then he fell silent. Benny Hinn stood there, eyes lowered, breathing measured. The weight of the moment pressed down on the stage like gravity. Assistants glanced at one another, unsure whether to step in or step back. The audience waited. Something had clearly shifted, not just in the room, but on the stage itself. And everyone watching could feel it. Whatever Benny Hinn was about to say next would define this moment forever. The silence after Steven Seagal finished speaking was unlike anything the arena had experienced that night. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from confusion or boredom. It was heavy, reflective, almost uncomfortable. Thousands of people sat frozen, unsure whether they had just witnessed a divine interruption or a deeply personal moment that wasn't meant for public eyes. Benny Hinn stood motionless at the center of the stage. The microphone hung loosely in his hand now. His confident posture from earlier was gone, replaced by something far more human. His shoulders were slightly slumped, his gaze fixed on the floor in front of him. For a man who had spent his life commanding rooms with words, he suddenly seemed to have none. He took a slow breath, then another. When he finally looked up, his eyes scanned the crowd not as a preacher surveying his audience, but as a man searching for grounding. The cameras caught it clearly. There was no performance in his expression, no smile, no dramatic flair, just wait. Steven Seagal remained where he was, hands by his side, his role clearly finished. He wasn't seeking validation. He wasn't waiting for applause. In fact, he looked relieved, as if releasing a burden he had carried all night. Benny lifted the microphone slightly, then stopped. He closed his eyes. A murmur spread through the crowd as people sensed something unfolding that could not be scripted. A few audience members began praying softly. Others clasped their hands together, bracing for what might come next. When Benny finally spoke, his voice was quieter than anyone expected. "I've stood on stages like this for many years," he said slowly. "I've heard thousands of testimonies. I've witnessed moments I still can't explain." He paused, swallowing hard. "But tonight feels different." The crowd leaned forward almost instinctively. He turned his head slightly, looking toward Steven. "What you said, whether people believe it or not, it demands reflection." Benny stopped again, visibly fighting emotion. "There are moments," he continued, "when a man must ask himself hard questions not in front of the crowd, but in front of God." A hush fell over the arena. Benny lowered his head briefly, then looked back up, his eyes glistening under the stage lights. "And sometimes," he added, "those questions come when we least expect them, from places we didn't anticipate." The room felt fragile now, as if any sudden movement could shatter the moment. Benny shifted his stance, placing the microphone closer to his chest. "I won't respond with defense," he said. "I won't respond with explanation." That alone drew a quiet wave of reaction from the crowd. "I will respond with honesty," he said. People held their breath. There is a difference between being used by God and assuming God will always approve of how we are used. That sentence landed hard. Benny took another breath. "And tonight," he admitted, "I feel the weight of that difference." The cameras caught Steven Seagal's face briefly. He nodded once, not in agreement or pride, but acknowledgement. Benny looked out over the crowd again. "Faith," he said, "is not proven by how loudly we speak, but by how deeply we listen." A few people quietly said, "Amen." The atmosphere had shifted completely now. What began as a revival had transformed into a moment of collective self-examination. People weren't cheering, they weren't clapping, they were thinking. Benny lowered his voice even further. "If even one person in this room feels uncomfortable right now," he said, then perhaps something important is happening. It is, he paused. And if that person is me, he added softly, then I must not ignore it. A ripple of emotion passed through the crowd. Some nodded. Others wiped tears from their eyes. Benny turned his body slightly away from the audience, as if needing a moment to steady himself. His breathing became more visible now. His hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his grip on the microphone. Steven took a small step backward, sensing the shift, allowing space. Benny faced forward again, but something was clearly changing. His voice wavered just slightly for the first time. I ask you to pray with me, he said quietly. Not for spectacle, not for healing, just for clarity. The music did not start. No choir joined in. No dramatic build-up followed, just silence. Then Benny's knees buckled slightly. It wasn't sudden enough to cause panic, not yet, but enough for those closest to the stage to notice. His free hand reached instinctively toward the podium beside him. The crowd gasped. Assistants at the edge of the stage stepped forward, uncertain whether to intervene. Benny steadied himself, but only barely. Something was happening, not emotionally alone, not spiritually alone, something physical, and everyone watching could feel it. This moment was about to cross a line no one could ignore. The tension in the room tightened, every eye fixed on the stage, because whatever was unfolding inside Benny Hinn now was no longer just words. For a split second, it seemed like Benny Hinn had regained his balance. His hand rested against the podium, his head lowered, his breathing slow but uneven. From a distance, it looked like a man simply pausing, gathering himself after an emotional moment. But those closest to the stage could see the truth. His shoulders were trembling. The microphone slipped slightly in his hand, producing a faint echo that cut through the silence. That small sound was enough to alert everyone in the arena that something was wrong. Benny? Someone whispered near the front row. He tried to speak. No words came out. Instead, his lips parted as if searching for breath that wouldn't fully arrive. His eyes fluttered open and closed, unfocused now, as though he were no longer entirely present in the room. A hush of panic rippled through the crowd. Assistants stepped closer, one of them reaching out but hesitating, unsure whether to touch him, unsure whether this was a moment of prayer or an emergency. Benny lifted his head again, forcing himself upright. I'm fine, he attempted to say. The words barely formed, his knees buckled without warning. In one sudden, unmistakable motion, Benny Hinn collapsed forward, slipping from the podium and dropping to the stage floor. The sound echoed. A collective gasp exploded from the audience, followed by screams from different sections of the arena. People stood up all at once. Some cried out his name, others instinctively began praying out loud. Jesus, help him. Lord, please. Oh my God. Assistants rushed in immediately, kneeling beside him, calling for medical staff. The camera feed shook as operators scrambled to adjust, some instinctively pulling back, others zooming in before realizing the gravity of what was happening. Steven Seagal reacted instantly but quietly. He stepped back further, placing his hands together, his head bowing. There was no shock on his face, no triumph, no expression that suggested, I told you so. Only concern, only stillness. The music did not play. No one spoke into the microphone. The arena, moments ago filled with tension, now pulsed with fear and uncertainty. Medical personnel ran onto the stage. Someone called for water. Another shouted instructions. The orderly rhythm of the event had collapsed along with the man at its center. Benny lay on his side, eyes closed, his chest rising and falling rapidly. One assistant supported his head, while another loosened his collar. The microphone lay abandoned near the edge of the stage, feedback humming faintly before being cut off. The crowd watched in stunned silence. This was no longer symbolic, no longer spiritual metaphor. This was real. A few people in the front rows were crying openly now. Others stood frozen, hands covering their mouths. Phones were still recording, some out of instinct, others unsure when to stop. Steven Seagal remained where he was, unmoving. Someone near him whispered, "Did this happen because of what you said?" Steven shook his head slowly, firmly. "This is not about me," he said quietly. "This is between him and God." On stage, medics worked quickly, checking Benny's pulse, speaking to him softly. After a tense moment, Benny stirred slightly, groaning as his eyes fluttered open. A wave of relief swept through the crowd, but it was short-lived. As he tried to sit up, his body gave out again. The medics gently but firmly held him down, signaling that he should not move. One of them waved toward the side of the stage, calling for a stretcher. The reality of the situation set in. This wasn't a dramatic fall meant to inspire faith. This wasn't a moment orchestrated for effect. This was a man overwhelmed physically, emotionally, spiritually, on live stage. The crowd began to pray in unison now, not prompted, not guided. The sound rose like a low tide of voices. Steven closed his eyes. Benny was carefully lifted onto the stretcher, his face pale, his breathing steadier but weak. As they prepared to take him off stage, he opened his eyes again, scanning the room briefly. His gaze met Steven's for a fraction of a second. There was no anger in his eyes, no accusation, only something that looked like understanding, mixed with exhaustion. The stretcher began moving. People stepped aside as medics wheeled Benny toward the exit. Some reached out, hands extended, as if proximity alone could help. The stage lights dimmed slightly. No one knew what to say. No one knew what this moment meant yet, but everyone knew one thing for certain. This night had crossed a point of no return. And as the stage emptied and the crowd stood in stunned silence, one question echoed in every mind watching both inside the arena and around the world. Was this a warning, an awakening, or something no one was prepared to understand yet? The arena felt hollow after Benny Hinn was taken off the stage. Where there had once been music, voices, and energy, there was now a heavy stillness, the kind that settles in after something irreversible has happened. People remained standing, unsure whether to sit, pray, or leave. No one rushed for the exits. No one spoke above a whisper. The stage lights stayed dim. A senior usher eventually stepped forward and gently asked the crowd to remain calm. Medical teams were with Benny backstage, he assured them. The words were meant to comfort, but they only deepened the reality of what had just unfolded. This was no longer a service. It was a moment suspended in uncertainty. Steven Seagal remained in the same spot where he had been standing since the collapse. He hadn't approached the stage. He hadn't addressed the crowd. His presence was quiet, almost invisible now, yet impossible to ignore. A few people nearby recognized him and whispered among themselves. "That's the man who spoke," someone said softly. "The one who said Jesus told him something." Steven overheard none of it or chose not to acknowledge it. His eyes were closed, his head bowed, his hands clasped together. Whatever he was feeling, he kept it inward. Backstage, medics worked methodically. Benny Hinn was conscious now, responding slowly to questions, though visibly drained. Doctors recommended immediate observation and rest. He nodded weakly, saying little. Word of his condition began to filter back into the arena. "He's awake. They're taking him to the hospital." He asked people to keep praying. A collective sigh of relief passed through the crowd, followed by a renewed wave of quiet prayer. Some people sat back down, hands clasped, eyes closed. Others remained standing, still shaken. Meanwhile, outside the arena, the moment had already escaped the building. Clips of the collapse were spreading rapidly across social media. Live streams were clipped, reposted, dissected. Headlines began appearing within minutes. Benny Hinn collapses on stage during revival service. Unplanned moment shocks. Faith. Event. Live. Steven Seagal's message, followed by on-stage medical emergency. Speculation exploded. Some called it a spiritual moment. Others labeled it emotional overload. Critics questioned everything. Believers defended everything. The internet did what it always does. It chose sides before facts. Inside the arena, none of that mattered yet. The people there were still processing the human reality of what they had witnessed. A man, known for strength and certainty, brought to physical collapse in front of thousands. An organizer eventually took the microphone. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Tonight's service will end early," he said gently. "We ask everyone to leave peacefully and keep Brother Benny in your prayers." No music played as people began filing out. Steven Seagal was among the last to leave. He slipped out through a side exit, unnoticed by most, declining offers to speak or comment. When someone asked him how he felt, he replied quietly, "This wasn't about a message going viral. It was about obedience." Nothing more. Outside, flashing lights from emergency vehicles reflected off the building. The night air felt colder than before. As hours passed, official updates were released. Benny Hinn was stable. Doctors cited exhaustion, dehydration, and emotional strain. No long-term damage was expected, but the explanations didn't fully satisfy anyone, because what people remembered wasn't the medical report. They remembered the silence before the fall, the weight of the words spoken, the look on Benny's face just before he collapsed. Do you believe moments like this are purely physical, or can intense spiritual and emotional pressure manifest in the body? Comment: physical, spiritual, or both below. Later that night, Steven Seagal released a short statement not to the press, but on a personal channel. "I did not come to accuse. I did not come to disrupt," it read. "I came because I was compelled to speak. What happened afterward belongs to God and to Benny, not to me." The statement only fueled more discussion. Some praised Steven's restraint. Others accused him of overstepping. Many simply sat with unanswered questions. By morning, the story had reached millions. But for those who were there, who felt the air change, who heard the silence, who watched a man fall, the moment wasn't a headline. It was a reminder that faith can be heavy, that platforms carry weight, and that sometimes the most powerful moments are the ones no one planned. The world was still reacting, but one final chapter remained, the part that would define how this moment would be remembered. By the next morning, the moment had become impossible to escape. Videos of the collapse flooded every major platform. Short clips played on repeat, some slowed down, some overlaid with dramatic music, others stripped bare, raw, and silent. Headlines used words like shocking, unprecedented, and unexplainable. Comment sections exploded with arguments, prayers, accusations, and reflections. But what most people didn't see in those clips was what came after. Benny Hinn remained in the hospital for observation. Doctors confirmed what had already been suspected: severe exhaustion, dehydration, and emotional overload. His body, they said, had simply reached a breaking point. There was no stroke, no lasting damage, yet even the doctors admitted something unusual. Stress alone rarely caused such a sudden collapse without warning. 2 days later, Benny released a statement. It wasn't long, it wasn't polished. It didn't sound like something written by a media team. It sounded personal. "I have spent time in silence," it read. "Not preparing sermons, not answering questions, just listening. This moment has humbled me more than any criticism ever could." That sentence alone shifted the tone of the conversation. For years, Benny Hinn had been a polarizing figure, loved by millions, questioned by others, admired and criticized in equal measure. But now, something had changed. The collapse stripped away the distance between platform and person. He continued, "There are moments when God interrupts us, not to shame us, but to realign us." I believe this was one of those moments. The statement didn't address Steven Seagal directly. It didn't validate or reject the message. It simply acknowledged the weight of the experience. Steven, for his part, disappeared from the spotlight entirely. He declined interviews. He ignored requests to explain what happened. Friends later shared that he had spent the following days in retreat, offline, praying quietly. When asked why he wouldn't speak publicly, Steven reportedly said, "If I keep talking, I turn obedience into performance." Quote, that line spread almost as fast as the original video. Meanwhile, the broader conversation evolved. Pastors debated the responsibility of platforms. Believers discussed humility versus visibility. Critics questioned spectacle and accountability. But beneath all of it ran a quieter reflection, one that didn't argue, didn't shout, and didn't trend as easily. What if moments like this aren't meant to be explained? What if they're meant to be felt and remembered? Weeks later, Benny Hinn returned to ministry, but not in the same way. His first public appearance wasn't on a stage. It was in a small gathering. No cameras, no live stream, no music. Those present said he spoke less, listened more. And at one point, he said something that echoed far beyond that room. "The loudest lesson God taught me wasn't in my collapse, it was in the silence afterward." That sentence closed the chapter for many, not because all questions were answered, but because something deeper had settled. The night Steven Seagal spoke, the moment Benny Hinn fell, the silence that followed, it all became part of a single story, not about power, or fame, or even controversy, but about fragility, about the weight of influence, about the reminder that no platform, no matter how large, stands above accountability. If this story made you reflect even for a moment, comment, reflect below. And if you believe true faith begins with humility, subscribe for more stories that explore the moments that change people forever. Because some moments aren't meant to entertain, They're meant to transform.